Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Fidelis. Today, based on a comment we got last week, we are going to be discussing the TV show This Is Us, which is a cultural phenomenon. It's now in its second season, and it's already been renewed for a third. And it's an ensemble drama about a family, the Pearson family, and basically their life together. So we're going to be discussing the show, and the reason we're discussing it is from a comment that was brought up last week. And before we get started, I'm going to say the obvious, and that is spoiler alert. In case you have not caught up on this season, or if you've just started on season 1, I have a lot of people on Facebook that are just now starting to watch because they see all of the feedback online. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to be spoiled, don't keep watching. Right. So, Lauren, how are you doing today?
Great. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm still ready for the sun to come back. The sun just is being really stubborn lately. But yeah, I hope everyone, if you haven't seen This Is Us, go watch it and then come back and watch our video because you don't want to miss this show. Even if you don't watch TV, make an exception for This Is Us.
So you're a fan of This Is Us?
Yes, huge. So when Parenthood was going, Parenthood ran for, I think, 7 seasons, maybe 8, I think 7. Anyways, Parenthood was my favorite show. That was about a family called the Bravermans who lived in California, and they were just they could be super dysfunctional, but then they would always reconcile, and there was so much redemption, and the storylines played out in an emotional but at the same time lighthearted way, really similar to This Is Us, and it was an NBC show. So when This Is Us ended, NBC was advertised to the fans of Parenthood, people who actually followed the show on Facebook and social media. This Is Us was advertised as the new Parenthood. And so I was waiting for This Is Us to come out months before the first season, the pilot, ever aired. And then I got even more invested in the show because the opening scene of the very first episode, there's a song playing in the background that's also really close to my heart by an artist named Sufjan Stevens. I had just seen him live in Chicago after many years of being a fan. And so I was totally on board with This Is Us the second that it came out. And I was it blew away all my expectations. So now today, I really try not to watch a lot of TV, but I do make an exception for This Is Us because it really inspires me and it makes me kind of want to be a better person. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it today. Are you a big fan of the show?
Yes. There are not a lot of shows that I watch that are appointment TV. I have a lot of TV that I watch. But most of them, it's just on the DVR. And then even when I do watch them, they're just kind of in the background and not really paying attention. Yeah. This Is Us is the one exception. If I don't have anything going on, then I watch it on Tuesday night or first thing, on Wednesday, when my kids go down for a nap, and I actually pay attention.
Yeah.
Most of the other shows, like The Amazing Race or The Bachelor or whatever, they're just kind of background noise.
Yeah.
This is different. And what I find interesting about this show is that it seems to speak to everyone. When you look on your Facebook feed, and this has got to be everyone, even if you don't watch the show yourself, you inevitably will see tons and tons of people after an episode talking about it. Yeah. And there's just something about this show that reaches everyone across, party lines and races and, generations and, just everything. It seems to be able to have something that can touch everyone.
Yeah, they've captured the human experience. I think they've captured suffering. Something everyone experiences is suffering. And they've captured the need that we all have for each other, even in the midst of conflict and not getting along. But that the importance of relationships. I think it's really good that it seems like they've purposely gone beyond partisan issues and modern politics to just get at the heart of what connects all of us. And they've done such a good job creating a drama and a storyline that's actually really entertaining, but you can relate to it on such a personal level, no matter who you are, because it just gets to the heart of that human experience.
Well, and what I find is interesting is that while they don't get partisan, ever, they still kind of bring up issues in a thoughtful way, like the issue of race. When, you know, in the first season, when Rebecca and Jack are struggling with the realities of raising a Black child because they are both white. From little things like, you know, do Black kids need sunscreen, to, you know, well, Randall doesn't have any Black role models in his life and he needs some. Or the issue of Randall going to, you know, a school like Harvard versus the school, I think that's fictional for the show, Howard College, I think it's fictional. That's a traditionally Black university. These are these racial issues that get brought up, and they're done in a sensitive and thoughtful way. Or one really moving moment for me, and it's something that, you know, as a white person, I don't have experience with, but it's brought up in such a way that's thoughtful, is when William, who is Randall's biological father, he's Black, is sitting there kind of accusing Randall of not understanding the Black struggle. And Randall talks about, you know, well, hey, when I walk into a jewelry store, I'm perfectly aware that I have to watch my movements, and I have to, you know, that I'm not going to be treated like the other customers and so on. And it's done in a way that's not, it's not antagonistic, I guess. It's thoughtful and sensitive, and it's a way that everyone can kind of step back and you can see things from a different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. They use storytelling so well to convey, the issues that we do have and we do struggle with in modern America. Another thing I really like how they handle is the issue of addiction.
Yes.
And the number of people in that family who suffered from addictions is, I would say, comparable to the number of people in an average American family. So you have Kate, who has a food addiction. You have William, who had a drug addiction. Jack has an alcohol addiction. They're all working, a lot of them are working through addictions. The other son, what's the blonde son's name? It just escaped me.
Kevin. Which is funny you say that, because that's like his whole storyline, is being the forgotten son.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Kevin. Don't take it personally. That's just how my brain works. I can't remember anything. But he has a prescription addiction. And I really like how they didn't just have the one token addict in the show, because that's not how the real world works. I mean, I know your family is probably like my family. There is a lot of addiction throughout the family, and it goes through generations, and it's caused by root problems that are unique to the person, but also tend to be repeated over and over again. And so I like how they're showing the struggle with addiction in the show. I think that's part of what makes it so relatable.
And especially that it humanizes people who are struggling with addiction, which I think is a big, big positive, because so often people think of drug addicts as just like the dregs of society. They're the worst of the worst, especially people who were hooked on hard drugs like heroin or even crack or something. And people just look down on them, and they think the worst of them, and they don't see them as humans anymore. They don't see them as people, and they don't understand that addiction is a disease. And so that was one of the things that I really appreciated about William's storyline, especially in the episode Memphis, which we're going to talk about later, because that's one of my favorite episodes. Yeah. But it shows that his drug addiction was not just, this isn't the sum of his life. This isn't who he is. There are things that lead someone to struggle with addiction, whether it's the generational aspects of, you know, family addiction, or the circumstances of their life and so on. Not that, you know, it excuses being on drugs, but it just, people who struggle with addiction are still people. They're still whole people. They're just people that have a problem. And there's so often compassion that's lacking towards these people. It's so hard for some reason for people to show compassion to drug addicts. And so I really appreciate that the show, it humanizes them, because someone who's an alcoholic or who is addicted to heroin, who is addicted to prescription pills, it doesn't make them less of a person. They're still a person, and they deserve our help, not our scorn.
Yeah, for sure. I love how they show like a spectrum of addicts too, because you have William, who spent a lot of his life, kind of like the whole middle part of his life, really in the stereotypical like hard drug user, out to lunch, not mentally engaged in society as that type of an addict. But then you have people that are struggling with addictions that are not easy to recognize. Like Kate struggles with eating, which is an addiction that a lot of Americans have, but we don't really view it in the same way that we view an addiction to drugs. And then the prescription use, I mean, so many people in the United States are using prescriptions and no one is even aware. Like their spouses and kids don't even know they're using them. They're high functioning individuals with addictions that are rampant in their lives, but they're not languishing on a street corner. They're going to work every day. They're picking their kids up from school. They're leading what appears to be a normal life. So I like how This Is Us is bringing attention to the fact that you can be a high functioning addict and still your life can secretly be in shambles and you can be in desperate need of help. And so I think it's probably raising awareness of helping people to identify the individuals in their own lives that are struggling in silence, and even giving a voice to the people who are watching who are addicts themselves. They handle the whole subject so well.
Yeah, and another thing that I've appreciated watching it is the dynamics of family, and how realistic it is, because oftentimes you will see on TV or in movies or in books, and I mean any kind of fictional setting, when it comes to family, it's, you'll have family members that have some kind of struggle, but it's not really realistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't really capture the human flaws that are existent in every family. And I think it's a lot easier to put someone in a box of being a bad parent or a bad daughter or a bad sibling or whatever. And with This Is Us, you really see, I think, a realistic version of, say, parenting with Rebecca and Jack. And that's something I think they've gotten better about in season 2, because in season 1, Rebecca, I loved her because she was such a great example of a flawed mother who was still a good mother.
Yeah.
But, that made mistakes and, was struggling sometimes and had, not resentments, but, kind of doubts about, did I make the right decision to give up my career and my dreams for my children? All of that was so realistic and I could identify with it. And then in the meanwhile, you had Saint Jack, who was just perfect and always did the right thing and never messed up. And it was starting to get frustrating, which was why I appreciated towards the end of season 1 and now all throughout season 2, we see more, of a flawed side to him as well. He's no longer Saint Jack. And that's even better for me, because even though they have their mistakes and their struggles and their doubts and their fears and all of these things, they're still good parents. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. They love their children. They work hard for their children, but hey, they make mistakes sometimes. And it's great because I see myself in that.
Yeah. I think that's the most powerful thing about This Is Us, is that you can watch it, and you can turn off the TV, and the feeling that I get every time I turn off the show is I want to go and be a better person, especially to the people in my immediate family, because it can be very easy to be nice to the cashier in the grocery store and nice to random strangers. It's the people that live in our house that are typically the hardest people to love. And I watch that show and I feel just like inspired and encouraged, and like there's almost a blueprint for going and doing something selfless for my spouse or giving my kids an extra word of encouragement. And I can identify with Rebecca so much because Jose is a selfless human being. Like, I've honestly never met somebody who's as selfless as my husband. And what always makes me so shocked is that no matter how often I return that selflessness with selfishness, he never just starts to turn in on himself. It's almost like he views me as a project. And I feel like this is how Jack was a little bit too. Like, if I just keep being selfless and doing my best, that's what's good for the other person. And I don't know, it's been incredible to have his real life example, but then to also start to see that in pop culture, I feel like that's going to do so much good. And it probably is doing a lot of good for marriages and families.
I think another great thing that they showed that does a lot of good for marriages and families is Rebecca and Jack overcoming all of their obstacles. Mm-hmm. There's this idea of their great love that they have, but we left the end of season 1 thinking, oh, they might get divorced.
Yeah.
Like she told him to leave. It might be over, and they had real issues. Mm-hmm. These weren't some token small things. Like these were real legitimate problems that they were having. And a lot of times I think you would see in real life and in TV, they get divorced because there's this message that gets sent that, well, if you're not happy or if you don't feel the butterflies anymore or whatever, that it's not working and you should be out of that relationship because you deserve happiness and all of this. And it's all very romantic, but it's also all very superficial, and it's not the way real marriage is supposed to be. In real life, it should be like what, Jack and Rebecca have, where they stay together and they fight it out, even though it's not always easy. And they have these obstacles that seem insurmountable, or, the spouse is going through addiction, or, they're having these fundamental disagreements about these major things, like, Rebecca deciding to go out on tour with an ex-boyfriend.
Right.
I was team Rebecca in that fight, don't get me wrong, but these are legitimate issues. Mm-hmm. They're not small fights. And instead of running away from their marriage and from their love for each other, they work on it and they work it out. And that's something that I find very inspirational for marriage, because we've all been there, right? If we're being realistic when it comes to being married, we've all been there where we've had these moments where, you've just gotten in a huge fight with your spouse and you think, I don't know how we can come back from this. I don't know how we will fix this. You do fix it, but you have those little moments of despair. But instead of giving in to them, you keep fighting. And that's what we see Jack and Rebecca do. And This Is Us.
Yeah, it's inspirational. We need a lot more shows like that, because the family is under attack in our culture. Like we've talked about this so many times on the show, and it's really encouraging and uplifting to see a show where people are actually trying to battle through the problems rather than running away from them. You see that a little bit in Randall and what's his wife's name?
Beth. They're like couple goals, Randall and Beth. Like that's the marriage.
Yeah. The way that they really have done a really good job with character development with those two, and they have these really opposite personalities, but to see how they've worked through those differences to become complementary, like they really complement one another so well in the show. How Beth is like really a go-getter. She's pretty strong-willed. She's no nonsense guy. And then Randall, he's not soft and squishy, but he has these idiosyncrasies that would be hard for most people to learn how to coexist with, and Beth has just figured him out, and their marriage is it's so cool to watch the way that they work through things. And I guess their most recent thing is working through the foster care situation and stuff. So I've just found them to be a really inspiring couple as well.
Well, and so speaking of the foster care storyline, one of the things that we have to talk about is how This Is Us is a show that's known for making people cry. Men, women, everyone that watches it makes them cry. And that was one. So we're getting into spoiler territory here. The most recent episode, actually, I think, was there one after that? I don't remember now. The Super Bowl, the one after the Super Bowl, where
there's one after that.
Yeah, okay. We see, yes, I remember now. So the last episode, I think that's the last one for the season, right? I think we're done until
I think so. Either that one or the next one that's coming out, I think, is the season finale.
So we have Randall and Beth that are going through the foster care system, and they have this girl Deja who is, difficult, but they grew to really love and care about her. And then she went back with her mother, which is how it should be. And that was another just really difficult storyline that they handled so well, because you see all the nuance, the complexities, and again, how this woman who is in prison and who has struggled with drugs, she's not a bad person or a bad mother. She's a mother who is struggling, who still loves her daughter, and so on. And anyway, we see them going through all this, and through the past few episodes, we've seen a social worker talking to a little boy, talking about how, you know, he needs to find a family, and there's a family that might be there for them. And this has gone on for a few episodes, but it was more prevalent in this most recent one. And we assume that this little boy, because Randall's talking about how, oh, maybe it'll be a boy next time, and he wants a boy in the house. So we think, oh, this is a little boy that's going to go to the Pearsons. But it turns out, you know, we see that the Pearson girls, Tess and Annie, had been struggling with foster care, especially Tess. Mm-hmm. She worries that her parents are, you know, not happy with their life with them, and so on. And Randall has a little talk with Tess. And then we see that Tess is the social worker in this clip that we've been seeing for episodes, that she grows up to work in the foster care system to, you know, help children find families. And she steps back and she's like, okay, here's your foster parents. And it's this little black boy and these white parents come in, and you're kind of like, oh, okay. And then Randall, and older Randall walks in. Yes. And he's, you know, hey, your dad's here for lunch with you. And oh my gosh, I just started crying.
Oh man. I really, really love how This Is Us handles adoption and foster care, because this is something that actually bothers me a little bit about the way the pro-life movement handles adoption, is that we act like the crisis is that we don't have enough infants, which is true. There aren't enough infants to adopt because so many preborn children are being aborted. But in the meantime, we have this huge need in the foster care system for older children to be adopted. So there's this huge waiting list for infants, and typically it's for infants that are like the same race as the couple that wants to adopt, who don't have any medical issues. So I think it's easy to fall into this pattern of viewing adoption as this thing where you get a baby that looks exactly like your perfect baby that you couldn't conceive naturally, and that's what adoption is. But in the US, we have this incredible need for children with special needs, children with an imperfect background, and children who aren't infants in the foster care system to be adopted. And This Is Us does a really good job of showing adoption and foster care of the kids who need it most. Like with Jack and Rebecca, Jack and Rebecca lose one of their triplets in childbirth, and they adopt a child who's Black. And like you already alluded to, they go through the struggle of like having adopted a child of another race. And Rebecca's mom is actually racist, so she has to deal with the whole issue of her own mother not embracing her adopted child. And then with Randall and Beth, you see the adoption of a child from foster care. When they initially were thinking about adopting an infant, they end up adopting from someone, or fostering someone from the foster care system who needed a family, but it required a lot more self-sacrifice in a way, because they knew she wasn't necessarily going to be with them forever, and she was bringing a lot of issues into their family that they were going to have to deal with. This wasn't just like a clean slate, perfectly healthy infant that was getting handed to them. And so I really appreciate that This Is Us is shining a light on what the reality is of adoption and foster care in the US. Yes, there's a waiting list for infants, and yes, it would be wonderful if we could give the parents that are in line infants because they weren't being aborted. But we also should ask people to stretch their willingness to adopt people from foster care who may not fit the description that they had in mind of what their perfect child would look like, especially if they don't already have kids. I totally understand for people that already have kids in the house wanting to bring in an infant for a number of reasons, just being afraid of exposing their existing children to problems that they don't need to deal with. But if you're childless and you can adopt from foster care, it's something that we should encourage people to do.
Well, it's something that actually, you know, because I've always thought about adopting, and initially my thought was, A child from overseas with special needs, because in a lot of countries, children with special needs or disabilities, basically they get put in orphanages and it's a death sentence. So that was my first thought. And then I read an article that really moved me. And it was about a child in foster care, and it was written by a social worker. And she was talking about how when he had to leave his latest foster home, that this upset her more than all of the other ones, because before, he had been so upset, and like one time he was running around the room like trying to basically evade being taken out of the home because he didn't want to leave again. He didn't want to leave the stable home that he found and so on. And this time he was just kind of broken and just left with his little bag of belongings and got in the back of the car and then said, just started crying and said, "No one loves me, not even my mother that gave birth to me." And that just broke my heart. And then she's sitting there talking about through his life, there's adoption events, and he goes with all of these prospective families, and he's in middle school, and he brings his report card that has all A's because he's hoping, hey, maybe some parents will see this and think, I'm a good kid and I'm worthy of being adopted and loved. And, she said, no child should ever have to prove that they deserve a family.
Yeah.
And, basically he goes his whole life without being adopted. And then at the age of 18, he was murdered and he died. And the only people that came to his funeral were his birth mother and the social worker. And it just broke my heart. And I thought, this is such a huge problem because, here in Florida, you can actually see some of the children who are waiting for adoption. And I went and I'm browsing and I'm looking, and it's all of these kids, they're all older. They're all older. They're all, middle school or high school aged. And it's just, I can't even imagine being that age and wanting a family to belong to and no one wants you.
Yeah.
Because, and when I've talked to people about it, a lot of times, you'll hear things like, well, they're going to be 18 in 2 years anyways. What does it matter? And it's like, well, they're not looking for a house to live in for 2 years. Right. They're looking for a family to belong to forever.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's something actually my husband and I have talked about. And when our kids get to be around that age, that's something we want to revisit and consider, because it is this huge need. Like in this girl, Deja, who now she's come back. That was one of the big surprise reveals. The last episode was that she came back, and we don't know why or what the story is. But you have these older children, and they're so overlooked and they're not wanted. And it's because people sit there and think, well, they have issues, they have problems, they have baggage. Well, yeah, they do. But you know what? They need love. Yeah. They need love in a family just like everyone else. And we can't just keep passing them off because we want the little perfect child that fits into our perfect life and a perfect scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to consider how we're contributing to the culture that commoditizes children when we do view adoption as finding the child for the family. And that's why I really love the Dave Thomas Foundation, because their whole motto is to find families for kids who are in danger of aging out of the foster system. And it really hit me at one point when I thought about what would it be like to age out of the foster system? Because like you said, kids that are in high school aren't looking for a place to live for the rest of their lives. They're looking for a family that that's gonna call them on their birthday, a house that they're gonna go to for Christmas dinner, just to come in and have an anchor family where they come back for holidays. I can't imagine aging out of the foster system and literally not having one family or person that I call or spend Christmas with annually, because you think about how grounding having that one family, no matter how dysfunctional they are or what your disagreements have been or whatever in the past, having that one family that you spend Christmas with. It's just incredible to think that there's people walking around on the streets that don't have that are just spending holidays with like a random friend every year, So I like the Dave Thomas Foundation. They seem to be really pro-life. They don't have like a statement against abortion, but they're definitely changing the narrative so that they want to work. They have like social workers that work with kids one-on-one. So typically the social worker is working more with the family to find the kid that fits them. But the Dave Thomas Foundation wants to turn the tables on that whole view. And they want to find families for the kids that are looking to just be there for people who need them and aren't looking for like a designer child. So it's a really cool organization.
Now, to kind of, I guess, change the topic, I guess, a little bit. I do want to talk about, all of the emotional moments in This Is Us, because that's really what the show is known for. So we can't not talk about it. We have to talk about it.
Are you going to make me cry on the screen?
Sorry?
Are you going to make me cry on the screen?
I might. I don't know about you, but I will fully admit I might cry.
Yeah.
What are there any particular episodes or moments that have stood out for you?
Yes. Well, there's a couple in particular, but really in every episode there are, I would say, two of my favorite moments in the show. One, when Kate goes to so Kate is the one who struggles with an eating disorder. She binge eats, and as a result, she's morbidly obese. And she decides, she gets into this really good relationship with a supportive guy, and she decides that she's going to try to take control of her weight before she pursues like further fat loss surgeries or anything like that. So she goes to this camp, I guess you would call it, where she's going to learn healthy eating habits and exercise and be among people who are struggling with the same thing. And she's just going through a lot of struggles during the camp. And she's realizing, and I think every addict might have this moment where they have to come face to face with why they have their addiction. And for Kate, it's because she was very close to her father. And because of a number of circumstances, she never really got to have closure or healing from his death when she was a teenager. So she spends her whole life, her eating disorder starts earlier as a child, but it really is exacerbated by his death. And so she spends her life almost running from the feelings of loss that she never really got to grieve properly. And so there's this one scene where she's having some doubts about the validity, I think, of the whole fat camp schedule and all the classes she has to do and the conversations. And it feels kind of empty, I think, to her. But she goes into this one class and she's just going through the motions. And it's a class, it's sort of like a yoga meditation type class. But at one point they give everybody these like sticks to bang on the ground. And they're encouraging everyone to just like get pent up emotions out. And you see Kate is just going along with the motions. And then at some point, like, she actually starts to face her reality that she didn't grieve her dad's death. And you see her just like make this primal roar where all of her emotions from the loss of her father are actually coming out, and they're showing flashbacks at the same time. And it's such a beautiful and like moving scene. I think, because I don't know, I feel like it was one of those scenes that everyone can watch it and relate to some moment in their life where they had that reality hit them and they got to get it all out type of experience. And I thought she did a perfect job acting that scene. And it really did show you a new side of Kate that I think had never been shown in the show before. So that's one of the moments I love. The other one is another thing I think a lot of us can relate to is anxiety, PTSD, panic attacks. And Randall struggles with anxiety. He's had it from a kid. It's one of his idiosyncrasies, and he's kind of tried to compensate for being a little socially awkward by just burying himself in books and knowledge. And at one point, some things kind of coalesce in his life that a bunch of crises happen all at one time. And he just kind of has basically a nervous breakdown in his office. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, where everything comes to a head and you feel helpless. And it was really moving because Randall had always struggled to get along with Kevin, and Kevin comes in as Randall's having a nervous breakdown. And there's kind of this moment of connection for them that they've never had before. And it's really, really beautiful to see how Kevin starts to find himself in serving Randall and reconciling with Randall, because Randall spent his whole life trying to get Kevin's approval. And Kevin, I think, isn't able to connect with Randall until Randall's the one with the vulnerability and needs Kevin's help, and Kevin's the only one who's there to support him. So you sort of see the beginning. I guess I would say for me, like the emotional moments that hit me the most in the show is when there's like a turning point in somebody's life and they get like a start over moment. Because I guess for Kate, Randall, and Kevin, those are the two scenes that really impacted me the most.
And we had kind of a continuation of that just recently. It was before the Super Bowl episode, but after Kevin, when he was struggling with his addiction, was drunk and got in the car to go drive, and he didn't know that Tess was in the back seat. And so he's driving along, flying down the road, hammered out of his mind, and Tess pops up, Uncle Kevin, slow down. And so Randall and Beth understandably are furious at him, and Kevin checks into rehab, and Beth does not want to go and be there for him. But Randall's like, no, we're going to do it anyways. And when I feel like I want to kill him, I can't remember what it was he said he was going to say. Oh, we're here for you, Kevin, I think. I'm just going to take a deep breath and say, we're here for you, Kevin. Even though he was angry at him, he still stepped up and was there for his brother. And they were able to come to reconciliation, which was really nice. When speaking of the Super Bowl episode, actually, that was one that was supposed to be the big tearjerker episode because we finally find out the details of how Jack died. I will say it was a little bit, I don't want to say disappointed because it was really well done, but Jack's actual death wasn't so much the part that was sad for me. I mean, obviously it was the reaction of everyone else, when we first saw the fire the night before and we're slowly watching the house burn, and there's this beautiful song, It's to Build a Home, playing over it. And it's like, you see their memories, you see them dancing in the living room or something, and the living room goes up in flames, or you see them, on the bed together, and then that goes up in flames. And that was really moving and emotional because it's like, I mean, that's everyone's worst nightmare.
Exactly. I have a feeling you're saving Jack's actual death for another episode. Like, I have a feeling there's stuff that happened that they're going to show around his like actual dying part.
Yeah, because we don't actually see him die. Rebecca leaves the room. Mm-hmm. She walks out and she's on the phone. She's trying to get them a hotel. And you see in the background, like in slow motion, you see the nurses, like she's obviously been out of the room for quite some time. She's trying to check on the kids, get them a place to stay. She thinks everything's fine. And then she goes over and gets a candy bar, and the doctor walks in and, tells her that Jack has passed away. And her first response is to take a bite of the candy bar. And she later, is telling Kevin that she felt so guilty about that her entire life, that she just tortures herself for that. And then she walks, and we don't see Jack. We just see her. We can kind of see his reflection, like in the glass, but it's very centered on Rebecca. And then she starts to just break down, which was emotional. But for me, the biggest part there was when she gets home, to Miguel's home, and Miguel comes out and she has to tell him that Jack died. He starts to react very emotionally, and she has to tell him, no, you can't do that right now because I have to go in and destroy my children's world. Mm-hmm. And I have to be strong for them. And she even says, God help me, I'm going to be strong for them. So if you can't handle that, then you need to walk away and leave. Mm-hmm. And that just really resonated with me as a mom because how do you do that? Yeah. How do you do that as a mom?
But we do have to do that on a smaller level at times. I mean, there's times that we have to collect ourselves when we're going through something really difficult in order to do what our kids need from us.
And then the other part of that same episode that I found really moving was, we're kind of dealing with the fallout again of Kevin being in rehab, and he finally has told, his family how he's always felt forgotten, and how, Dad and Kate were, really close, and you and Randall were really close, and no one cared about me. And there's this huge blow up. And so they're kind of coming back from that. And so he's been living in, Rebecca and Miguel's house, and just like Kate, he hasn't been dealing with his grief. And so finally he goes and, this year, the 20th anniversary of his death, he's like, I'm going to deal with my grief. And they all have their little things that they do on the anniversary of his death. You know, like Kate watches the tape of her singing, and Rebecca makes lasagna and watches the Super Bowl, and so on. And Rebecca mentions, you know, every year your dad sends me something that makes me laugh. Every year. You know, that happens every year. I don't know why, but it just does. And I know he's still with me. And so it gets to be the end of the day, and, you know, no sign has come. Nothing's come to make her laugh. And then Kevin calls her, and he's like, yeah, I came over here and I'm sitting at Dad's tree. And he had just had this conversation with Jack, you know, where he's like, I'm not the man you would want me to be. And I'm so ashamed and I'm so disappointed in myself, but I'm going to be better for you.
Yeah.
That made me all teary. And then he calls her and he tells her that. And he's like, you want to know something funny? I don't even know if I'm at the right tree. And she starts to laugh.
Close to the payphone.
Yeah. And so she starts to laugh and she goes, this is what your dad sent me this year. He sent me you.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh.
The writers of that show are geniuses, really.
Although for me, the big gut punch episode was Memphis. That was why I wanted to mention that, because Memphis was like,
yeah, they did.
I was crying so hard that one that like I couldn't breathe.
Yeah,
at times it was like just like this onslaught.
Yeah, they do a really good job with Beth in that episode too.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, just you know, William, and that's another thing that I really appreciate, because my mom is adopted. So, and she has a relationship with her biological father, not her mother, but her biological father, as well as her adoptive parents. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I know that people, I think, tend to have kind of a weird idea about, you know, who's your real parents and so on. And it's like, it doesn't really work like that. Mm-hmm. And Memphis kind of shows that, you know, Randall very much loves Jack and Rebecca, but he loves William too. Mm-hmm. So you see that. You see the love that he has for all of his parents. And that was one of the things that, you know, like when William goes to Jack's tree and sits down, and I want to say thank you to the man who raised my son. That was just like, That was, and when he sits there and talks about how he wants Tess and Annie, their last memory, to be looking up at him instead of looking down at him.
Yeah. They
did all the little flashbacks with his mom, you know, how she's a war widow, and, you know, her dying and him taking care of her as she died. And let me think. And you talk about Randall's anxiety. That's brought up in this episode. And he talks about how Jack would calm him down when he got scared by holding his face, and they would breathe together. And then he does that with William, looking down at him, like he said, like holds his face, and they breathe together until he takes his last breath.
So good.
And then like last one, when William, you know, those last moments, and he's reunited with his mom and dad. Mm-hmm. That just killed me.
Yeah. It was a beautiful episode. You and I are both really pro-life, and I think that episode did such a good job. Like we were talking about It's a Wonderful Life the other day. That episode did such a good job of showing how important every single life is, no matter how insignificant it seemed when that person was alive. Because William spent a lot of his life high and stoned, but they do due diligence in showing how his life started, how his life progressed, what tragedies and betrayals that he experienced, what it was like to leave Randall at the fire station, like why he did it, what led up to that, and how he struggled with Randall's existence when Rebecca wouldn't let them interact during Randall's childhood. And This Is Us showed like redemption perfectly in the way that they showed the end of William's life. And I really like how they tie Beth into that story, because you start to get to know Beth by getting to know William. And I thought they did such a great job with their friendship. In Parenthood, my favorite character is Christina Braverman. She's the wife of one of the siblings. So Parenthood is also about a set of siblings and their parents. But Christina married into the family. And I think This Is Us might have based Beth's character on Christina, because there's a lot of parallels between their personality and also how the two women interact with their fathers-in-law. And yeah, Beth, the way that they start to introduce Beth through William is really beautiful. But yeah, that was definitely a powerful episode. I was definitely crying in that one too.
Oh yeah. And I mean, there's been a lot of episodes where I've, cried or whatever, but that one, it was, I mean, like just talking about it. Like I was literally like, by the end, like gasping for air. Like I was just sobbing. And then the very end, the ducks come walking across. It was like,
yeah,
so good. Everything about that was just perfect. And it's funny because the whole thing around Jack's death, I thought, well, that's going to be so much more, just about this emotional torture. But no, Memphis was really the one episode for me that was, I don't want to say the worst, but as far as like crying, happening, Memphis was the one that I just like start to finish. It was just, I think it pretty much started when he went to Jack's tree and was like, I would like to meet Jack. So they take him to the tree. And that was when it started, and it pretty much never ended.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a powerful show because you and I are not like walking, crying heaps of emotion 99% of the time. But This Is Us just has a way of getting straight to the core of your being somehow. And it's so well done.
Yeah. Well, I will admit I cry at like everything. Well, I shouldn't say everything, but like movies and stuff, I cry really easily at movies. Like Matt, we watched the new Beauty and the Beast last night. I was crying at the end of that. Like I cried at everything.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, when all of the servants like turn into, like just their humanity gets taken away, and like, Mrs. Potts is, calling out for Chip, and yeah, I cry.
Yeah. Well, that's valid. That's valid.
But yeah, so yeah, I'm already a crier. So This Is Us is like, just there's no way that I cried a lot of the episodes with This Is Us. Now there was one thing that we specifically wanted to talk about, and that was the comment that was left where a priest friend recently started a bit of a firestorm on his Facebook because he thinks it promotes the idea that you can be good without God. Now, you said you have a lot of thoughts about that.
I don't know about a lot, but I did think about the question, because when I first read that, I thought, no, that's not true. And then I had to ask myself, am I just jumping to the defense of This Is Us because I love the show and I don't want it to be true? Or is it really not true? So I was thinking about it for a while. And this one quote kept coming back to me when I was reflecting on this question. Does This Is Us suggest that humanity can be good and survive and thrive without God? Because nobody in the show is, at least to this point, a practicing religious person of any faith, really.
Well, that we know of.
Exactly. There very well could be a moment when you see the family together praying the rosary or something, and all along they just hadn't been showing their religious side. We don't know. But here's what kept coming back to me was St. Francis's quote that we as Christians are called to preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, we should use words. And I feel that no matter what the intention of the show creators are, God is using This Is Us to preach the gospel to the world in terms that our secular, post-Christian country can understand. Because the show is teaching selflessness. It's teaching the value of suffering. It's teaching so many good Christian values without introducing faith. Because let's be honest, most millennials would change the channel if faith were introduced into the show as the driving force of these people's goodness. If faith were introduced as something to make fun of, or as kind of just like an aside, or something that culturally distinguishes someone, like someone might be a Catholic just like someone could be a Jew, but they're not necessarily Christian. I think that would cheapen not only the show, but also the faith. And so I personally think that the show is like being used by God to improve people's lives and to hold people to a higher standard of Christian values. But I think that it's necessary that the show doesn't bring in religion in order to do that. So that's probably a controversial statement, but that's where I am right now.
I mean, I don't feel like that's controversial, because my thoughts on that's, showing that people can be good without God. I mean, for one thing, would it be nice if everything was Catholic and, our media culture? I mean, of course, but let's be realistic. That's never going to happen.
Right.
That's just not going to happen. Like, are we going to complain because Captain America is a good person? Well, that's not a good example because he's supposed to be Christian, I think. But, okay, Thor, Wonder Woman. So whoever, it's not really a valid complaint in my opinion. And even if we were to show them to have some kind of faith, we have to realize that in this world today, I mean, Catholics are the majority of Christians, but there's still all of these other denominations, not to mention Muslims and Jews, and then you have the atheists and agnostics. And I mean, let's be honest, this show is looking to appeal to as many people as possible.
Right.
If they were to have the Pearsons be Muslim, imagine the outcry, even Catholic, honestly. I think if it were to be the only show that has a Catholic family is The Real O'Neills, which is anti-Catholic.
Right.
So, I mean, just if we're going to be realistic here, that's just not going to happen. And so, I mean, I don't think it's showing anything as being without God. They don't really have the Pearsons talk about religion in any way, shape, or form. And I'm sure that that's intentional, because then you can kind of place it into your own, worldview. Yes, someone who's an atheist can look at this and say, okay, well, they don't mention God, so they must be an atheist like me. Someone who's religious can look at it and say, well, they might be religious and they just don't talk about it on the show. It gives people the opening to interpret it how they want to. And ultimately, the important thing to me is, like what you said, all of the values that are being promoted here. So even though they're not specifically talking about God, I just don't think that that's fair to say, well, that means that they're showing you can be good without God. Well, I mean, no, I don't think that that's really what it's doing, because they never say that, which again, I'm sure that's an intentional ploy.
Yeah. The reality remains that those values do come from a Judeo-Christian worldview. Whether the show acknowledges that doesn't really matter to me, but that the show is showing those values as something that we should aspire to and that make our lives better, I think that's where the power of the show is.
Yeah, and I mean, it just, like showing the humanity of people that are struggling with addiction as a pretty big example. That's something that, the Catholic Church really promotes. I mean, not even just addiction, but just any people that are considered expendable by society.
Exactly.
Catholicism is very big on promoting, seeing their humanity, the homeless, the addicts, and people in prison, even people on death row, So, and that's something that we see on This Is Us.
Yeah.
And that's not something that I feel like should just be kind of brushed off because we don't see them praying the rosary, or going to mass, because like I said, for all we know, hey, maybe they, it's not said, and they do that on purpose. Like, I mean, call me cynical, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
They're not about to sit there and come out and say, oh, well, this is an evangelical family, because then that's going to turn off everyone else that's not evangelical that watches. So you fill in the blanks how you want to. And then in the meantime, look at the values it's promoting. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It would definitely be awesome if one of the actors used their celebrity power to, promote their faith, but I'm not going to hold them to that standard or anything. But Mandy Moore is Catholic, so it would be really cool if she did.
Is she really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if she's like a practicing Catholic or if she's just a Catholic in the sense of like culturally that's her background. But she has like a long time ago, I saw an interview with her where she was talking about what she was giving up for Lent and stuff. And so it would be cool. I mean, I think it would be a great witness if people like her used that platform that they have to talk about their faith in a way that would encourage other people to follow suit. But I think the show is, honestly, I don't think the show should be doing anything different than it is doing. I think it's perfect the way it is.
Yeah. And I mean, even like you mentioned, it has pro-life values. And I mean, that hasn't really, come right out and said anything about, like abortion, obviously. And that's something I don't expect them to tackle for the same reasons, again, not because they're like, ooh, we're pro-life. I mean, just, yeah, they don't want to, they don't want to take on the controversy. But I still feel like there's pro-life moments in the show. Yeah.
Big time. I mean, you've got the miscarriage and the adoption and the foster care.
Kate's miscarriage, I think, is a perfect example. And for those who may not have seen that episode, you have Kate, she gets pregnant, she's morbidly obese, she's older, she's got all of these risk factors, but she lets herself feel excited eventually, and then she has a miscarriage. And already as it is, she doesn't have the greatest relationship with Rebecca. They're kind of always butting heads and at odds with each other. And she tells Rebecca, and Rebecca asks if there's anything that she can do, and Kate's just kind of very short with her and just gets off the phone and is like, no, and she doesn't want to talk about it. And Rebecca shows up anyways, and Kate just falls into her arms and starts, sobbing. And it's like this just sign, this is a person, a wanted person that was lost. This wasn't just a clump of cells. This was a person.
Yeah, and that's going to go a long way to changing the culture. There's so many facets to the move to end abortion. I mean, there's so many different things that need to happen in the culture. And first and foremost is just recognizing the value of every individual life. And This Is Us is doing its part in the pro-life movement, whether it realizes it or not, by really eviscerating that idea that humans are commodities or that your life is valuable based on XYZ criteria that you have. They're really doing a good job of showing that every human life is valuable no matter what, just because they're human. Yeah.
And I mean, whether it's, the babies that Kate and Rebecca lost. And that's another thing that I think was really great too, is that they don't ignore Kyle.
Yeah.
Who's the third baby that they named and lost. And they still talk about him, on occasion. It wasn't just, oh, well, they got Randall and he's a replacement, so everything's fine.
Right.
Because it's not how it works in the real world. You don't lose a baby and then get another one and say, oh, well, that other one doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
That was still a person that they lost. And they continue to bring him up, and the grief process and how sometimes they feel like he's missing and so on. And it's just, that goes such a long way to making a difference in the culture.
And that's real life. I mean, I've had 2 miscarriages, and sometimes when I'm like setting the table, I'll put an extra plate because I think there's someone else there and there's not, but that person stays with you forever, especially if you're a mom. And so I think they just hit the nail on the head with the whole miscarriage, child loss, pro-life. Very good job. This Is Us. If you ever watch this, we approve.
Yeah, I really am curious to know which priest said that, if it's someone that kind of tends to be someone that stirs things up a lot, or, not going to name any names, but.
Yeah, there might be more context to it, maybe they do have a good argument for it, but I think we definitely disagree. Yeah,
offhand, just from that one comment, I just don't see it that way. I mean, at absolute best, that's something where, sure, it would be nice if everything had a Catholic worldview in our culture, but that's just not realistic, and it's not going to happen. And I think that you're expecting too much if that's what you expect, that everything is going to show God as being the source of all goodness, which he is, but that's just, it's not going to happen on TV or in movies or in radio or anything.
Yeah, and I mean, think if This Is Us is inspiring secular atheists to be better people, that might be what ultimately leads them into the church. So
Right.
this is a starting point where this is where they're at. This show is preaching Christ to people without them even knowing it, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely agree.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it for us today. Is there anything else you wanted to tackle involving the show?
No, that's everything. And I'd love to know other people's thoughts. And if you haven't watched it, it's worth your time.
Oh, yeah. And I know a lot of people I've been seeing on Facebook are just starting from season 1, like on demand and everything. So don't feel like it's too late. Yeah. You're not alone. You can still catch up. And I recommend you do because it's just amazing. Mm-hmm. So for sure, definitely make sure to check out the show because it's a fantastic show. It's got great values. It's realistic, and just make sure you either wear waterproof mascara or bring a lot of because it will make you cry. Just cry talking about it.
Yeah. I was crying listening to you talk about it. So yes.
So. Yeah, I think that's it for us. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and share this video. Check us out on Twitter at Fidelis Women. And we will see you next week and tune in next time.
Thanks, everyone.